to Literacy Matters. We are so excited to talk to Dr. Miriam Ortiz. So welcome back, Dr. Ortiz.
Thanks. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what inspired you to go into the field of education.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Miriam Ortiz, and I am the owner and chief consultant of K12 Matters, LLC, and we help organizations incorporate evidence-based practices into everything that they do in order to promote positive outcomes for children. And so what inspired me to go into education? So I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and I didn't go to a school that was that great growing up. But the teachers in my life really made a difference. And they saw something in me and encouraged me and, really helped motivate me to do more and to work hard. And I see a lot of, kids out there and teenagers out there. And I have plenty of friends that dropped out of school. And I know that if they would have had the same support that I did, or if they would have had a teacher that really, really encouraged them or supported them, that, their outcomes would be different. And so I knew that I wanted to be a part of making that difference.
Well, that's so inspiring. And certainly I'm excited that you get to pay that forward and have been paying that forward in your own classes as a teacher and now as the owner of your own education company. So that's exciting. So I'm glad you're paying it forward. So when you're thinking about teachers, and obviously you shared your background just now, what are recommendations to support teachers in meeting the diverse needs of all students in their classes?
So first, I would say, we really want to think about, assessing and understanding the various needs of our students. So whether that be through formative assessment or, if it's a student with a disability, then it would be, a more intensive diagnostic assessment, but really, really knowing our students, knowing what their needs are and being able to meet them where they are, I think is the most important thing. Knowing what those gaps are and providing intensive instruction for those students who are at risk or who are struggling, to really, give them that extra time or that extra, targeted, it's a lot of it is about, giving them that one-on-one time, right? That teacher-led instruction, that modeling, giving them the appropriate feedback to help build those skills.
Sure. And what I think connects to that also is really your story about your teachers and just how you were seen by them, how you were in this neighborhood that you said, was maybe low SES.
Right.
You were at a school that you said, wasn't as great, but you were seen by your teachers is not only maybe having a need, but also that you had all this like promise. So I love that idea of like really just thinking about meeting the needs by getting to know what our students need, but also getting to just know them, right?
Right, exactly. It's so much more than just knowing about their academics, but really knowing their background and knowing, what's going on at home if you can. I know that's not always possible, but really meeting the needs of the whole child.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What are some practical strategies to help teachers make certain that their small groups work? You mentioned, that small groups are really important in making sure that you are meeting the specific needs of those children. So what exactly are some things that they could do practically to make that happen?
That is a great question. Yeah, I'm a big cheerleader for small groups. I think it's so important for teachers to incorporate that in their instruction in reading and math, in so many different areas. But it is hard to keep that time sacred, right? Because you have, exactly like we've been talking about, so many different needs of so many different students. So one thing that I really strongly encourage my teachers to do is to start small with your small groups, right? Don't start with 10 different, centers or 5, even 5, I think is much. You want to really start with a very limited number of centers or groups. And then there needs to be processes and procedures in place throughout your classroom in general. Like, they need to be very specific, so the students know, this is what we do when I need to use the restroom. This is what we do when I need help with something. This is how we pick up our materials. This is how we put away our materials. So when you have and you practice those different processes and those different procedures, and then you can start working with your small groups, and you're not answering, 10 different questions of different students while you're trying to dedicate the sacred time to this group of students. And so also, it's really important, if you're doing small groups while the other students are doing centers, then really practicing those centers ahead of time, not just saying, okay, in this center, you're going to do this, and in this center, you're going to do that, but really practicing. This is what it looks like to be in this center. This is what it feels like. This is, an example of how you do it, and practicing that as a class and doing it well as a class. And so then, they're ready, okay, for you to work with this group, and they're ready to work on this center independently.
That's great advice. What advice might you give a teacher who has a class of learners whose needs are largely similar?
So honestly, when I think of a class that needs are largely similar, I think of, well, maybe they're all struggling.
Yeah.
Usually. But honestly, you really still want to use that formative assessment. You want to have those routines and processes in place for those students as well. And then you never want to stop really checking on them, right? So just because their needs are largely similar doesn't mean that that's going to remain so for the entirety of the school year. So, not being complacent with that being the fact, making sure that you are varying your modalities of instruction as well, so that we have our different types of learners really being able to get the most out of your instruction. And then there are still going to be some specific needs that different students have. And so really honing into that, really using, that formative assessment. I like to keep just pushing that, because it really is so powerful when we let that drive our instruction, knowing, what those needs of each of our students are, where those gaps are, or, if it's a student that is excelling, knowing what to target specifically for them for enrichment as well.
That's great. Great advice. You've been talking about assessment and formative assessments for sure. How can we help teachers manage all of the assessment data that they've, have, and how they can use it to support their students? I always say that data is not a 4-letter word. And I should say a bad 4-letter word, because
right.
It's a 3-letter word, but a bad 4-letter word. So, how can teachers manage and use all of that data?
I think sometimes, the data piece feels overwhelming because we don't necessarily always know how that data is being used. I think it's important to know the difference of the different types of data and what kinds of decisions we can make with each of the different types of data. So, for example, you're more cumulative data, or for example, like state assessments, that's always a hot topic, but that's really intended to be a snapshot in time, a big picture, right? We really shouldn't be making individual student decisions using that data. We want to use some more specific data that's done with assessments that are one-on-one with students, so that we really can hear their responses and really understand where their needs are. So really understanding the different forms of assessment, and trying to use that formative assessment, right? That's closely related to the curriculum that you're using or those skills that you're teaching, and really using that to inform your instruction. Inform, these are the gains that the students are making. This is specifically what they're learning, and this is the gap they have. So this is really where I need to target my instruction for this student.
Great. So, we know that it takes, the old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. How can the stakeholders in a child's life be active in supporting their literacy skills? So thinking about, like my aunt, for example, was very instrumental. What can, aunties and uncles and, and cousins and grandparents and mothers and fathers do to support their children?
I love that question. It's important to remember that, different people are going to show their support and encouragement in different ways, right? And just because they don't fit into this mold doesn't mean that they don't care and they want to support their student, their learner in their life. And so one of the simplest and easiest things that we could do is really talking to our children, like
Mhm.
really building that language, talking to them, especially our younger learners, right? Building that background knowledge and that oral language that is going to support them in their literacy acquisition later. Really, really just talking to them, modeling new words. If it's possible and feasible, giving our children new experiences, right? So they can learn different points of view and different things that also builds language and vocabulary. Reading to them. That's another one, so they are able to hear, your language development, right? And your prosody and your reading. So just reading, and it's a wonderful shared experience. And then really when giving feedback, when it comes to school or when it comes to literacy, really using an encouragement model and not in a positive model rather than being critical about things is extremely powerful. Anytime that you are correcting an error, I always like to, because my background is in behavior, right? I always recommend, like, tell them what to do, not what not to do. And it goes the same for like reading and literacy, right? So you model, if they're making an error, it's because they don't have that skill. So you want to model what's the correct way of reading that word, what's the correct way of sounding out. You're modeling that for them so that they can then acquire that skill and learn from that.
Great. That's, that all great advice. And what's in some of those things don't cost a dime, right? Which is really
Right.
great. Even thinking about those new experiences, while we'd love to take our our children out to these fancy places that cost a lot, there's a lot of things that you can do that don't cost anything.
Oh yeah, like visiting, my little boys love to just visit the local library,
Yeah.
right? And be able to choose whatever book they want, right? That's just so powerful. And then we read it together. And
Sure.
like you said, no cost, and it's really, it's impactful for their future.
Of course, of course. So when I think about a school year, right, a successful school year, what do you think a literacy block would look like? What does literacy look like? When you say, yep, I've had a really successful year, what does it feel like to you? And what advice might you give for educators on how to achieve that look and feel for a successful literacy year?
What a great question. Honestly, a successful school year to me would be having all of my students reading on grade level.
Yes.
That would be amazing. That would be great. And it's possible. And I've seen it. And it really goes back to really implementing those evidence-based practices, what we know works, going back to that science of reading, going back to differentiating our instruction and targeting the specific needs of our students, and then providing the right amount of intensity, right? So it takes time, it takes planning, and being positive and engaging about it yourself, so yeah, it is hard work, but it's possible, and the return you get on your investment, right, for really supporting the needs of your students and really planning and making that happen is amazing.
Sure. So as we close, is there one thing that you'd like to leave us with or highlight for our audience?
Sure. I would love to say that, as a teacher, if you're a teacher and administrator, you really do make a difference. You really do have an impact on the future of your students. There are so many adults now that you can go back and ask, was there somebody who made an impact on your life? And a lot of times they can actually name that teacher, right? That was instrumental in their lives. Also, build community, build professional learning communities. That's going to also be so powerful and really helping you as a teacher, as an instructor, whatever it is that you do. It really does, help you, keep that right? So
Sure.
when going on and going on throughout the school year.
Well, Miriam, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for all of your sage advice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor.